Welcome to The Great Gatsby, Chapter 2. Before we talk about some of the really important details in the chapter, I want to take a minute to review the map here because, again, in order to have a good understanding of what's happening in the story, you need to know where all of the characters are. So Chapter 2 really focuses on the Valley of Ashes. And so, again, all of the characters in our story so far live on East and West Egg in Long Island, and then they get on the train, go through the Valley of Ashes to get to Manhattan. So this is the area that we're going to be talking about first, the Valley of Ashes. The first skill I really want to focus on is diction. So please pay attention as I read this excerpt from Chapter 2 of the words highlighted in white. About halfway between West Egg and New York, the motor road hastily joins the railroad and runs beside it for a quarter of a mile so as to shrink away from a certain desolate area of land. This is a valley of ashes, a fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and hills and grotesque gardens, where ashes take the forms of houses and chimneys and rising smoke, and finally, with a transcendent effort, of men who move dimly and already crumbling through the powdery air. Occasionally, a line of gray cars crawls along an invisible track, gives out a ghastly creak, and comes to a rest. And immediately, the ash gray men swarm up with leaden spades and stir up an impenetrable cloud which screens their obscure operations from your sight. But above the gray land and the spasms of bleak dust which drift endlessly over it, you perceive after a moment the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. The eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg are blue and gigantic. Their irises are 1 yard high. Evidently, they look out of no face, but instead from a pair of enormous yellow spectacles which pass over a non-existent nose. Evidently some wild wag of an oculist set them there to fatten his practice in the borough of Queens, and then sank down himself into eternal blindness, or forgot them and moved away. But his eyes, dimmed a little by many paintless days under the sun and rain, brood on over the solemn dumping ground. The Valley of Ashes is bounded on one side by a small, foul river, and when the drawbridge is up to let barges through, the passengers on waiting trains can stare at the dismal scene for as long as half an hour. There is always a halt there of at least a minute, and it was because of this that I first met Tom Buchanan's mistress. Okay, so this passage describes in great detail the dumping ground that is the Valley of Ashes. So just take a look at only the white words and think about the function of that diction. What kind of a mood does it create? And what can you infer about Nick's attitude toward the Valley of Ashes? How does he feel about it based on these word choices? Shrink, desolate, fantastic, ashes, grotesque, ashes, smoke, transcendent, dimly, crumbling, powdery, gray, crawls, invisible, ghastly creak, rest, ash gray, leaden spades, cloud, obscure, gray, bleak, dust, drift, endlessly, non-existent, down, eternal blindness, forgot away, dimmed, little, paintless under, brood, solemn dumping ground, foul, stare, dismal, halt. Okay, so I'm going to ask the questions again. Analyzing diction helps us to decipher tone, or the author's attitude toward a subject. Based on that diction, what is Nick's tone in describing the Valley of Ashes? Now, it is easy to say negative. We know that all of those words, or for the most part, those words are negative. But take it one step further. What do they all have to do with? When you take a really close look, to me, they all have to do with death. They seem almost ghost-like. So words like ash repeated over and over again. Gray is repeated over and over again. Leaden spades. A spade is a shovel. He talks about impenetrable clouds. Everything is smoky. Endlessly drifting makes me think of a ghost. So go beyond just saying that it's negative and really try to come up with words that mean something a lot more specific. Okay, so again, it creates this mood, I think, of, it's almost like scary or it's an eerie sort of feeling that comes over the reader. So obviously Nick describes that his tone towards the Valley of Ashes is that it's this wasteland, this dumping ground. There's almost a tone of pity in his voice. He feels sorry for the people that have to live there. And then the mood created in you should be like eerie. It should make you think of things like death, ghosts. Let's try again. Here's a passage specifically about George Wilson. All right, so after analyzing the diction in the passage, explain Nick's attitude towards George Wilson. So as I read, just jot down any words that stand out to you as good choices in diction that allow you to understand the Nick's attitude towards George. I followed him over a low, whitewashed railroad fence, and we walked back 100 yards along under the road until under Dr. Eckelberg's persistent stare. The only building in sight was a small block of yellow brick sitting on the edge of the wasteland, a sort of compact main street ministering to it, and contiguous to absolutely nothing. One of the 3 shops it contained was for rent, and another was an all-night restaurant approached by a trail of ashes, and the third was a garage, repairs, George B. Wilson, cars bought and sold, and I followed Tom inside. The interior was unprosperous and bare. The only car visible was the dust-covered wreck of a Ford which crouched in a dim corner. It had occurred to me that this shadow of a garage must be a blind, and that sumptuous and romantic apartments were concealed overhead, when the proprietor himself appeared in the door of an office, wiping his hands on a piece of waste. He was a blond, spiritless man, anemic and faintly handsome. When he saw us, a damp gleam of hope sprang into his light blue eyes. Take a minute, pause the video, jot down a couple of word choices that stand out to you. Okay, hopefully you stopped and wrote down a few things, but here are the words that I came up with. Low, whitewashed, wasteland, absolutely nothing, unprosperous and bare, dust-covered wreck, crouched, dim, shadow, blind, concealed, wiping, piece of waste, blonde, spiritless, anemic, faintly, damp, light blue eyes. So all of these things surrounding Wilson, of course he is in the Valley of Ashes, but Nick's attitude towards George would be, he feels a little bit of sympathetic towards him, but again, he's calling him blonde, spiritless, anemic, and he does say he's faintly handsome, but the word faintly is really more significant than the handsome part. Everything about George Wilson is ghost-like. So he's fair, he's pale, even his eyes are like very light blue. Anemic means that you have low iron in your blood, so like kind of weak and frail. He's wiping his hands on a piece of waste. He's a mechanic, so he's covered in ash and soot and dirt and dust. And Nick is describing us to him in great detail. Let's meet Myrtle now. Myrtle is the wife. His voice faded off, and Tom glanced impatiently around the garage. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs, and in a moment the thickish figure of a woman blocked out the light from the office door. She was in the middle 30s and faintly stout, but she carried her surplus flesh sensuously, as some women can. Her face above a spotted dress of dark blue crepe de chine contained no facet or gleam of beauty, but there was an immediately a perceptible vitality about her, as if the nerves of her body were continually smoldering. She smiled slowly, and walking through her husband as if he were a ghost, shook hands with Tom, looking him flush in the eye. Then she wet her lips, and without turning around, spoke to her husband in a soft, coarse voice. "Get some chairs, why don't you, so somebody can sit down?" "Oh, sure," agreed Wilson hurriedly, and went toward the little office, mingling immediately with the cement color of the walls. A white ashen dust veiled his dark suit and his pale hair, as it veiled everything in the vicinity except his wife, who moved close to Tom. Okay, so I have 2 questions for you. What is Nick's first impression of Myrtle? This is a tone question. Analyze the diction and the imagery to come up with your answer. Okay, so what images do you see here? What diction do you see here? How does that help you decide what Nick's first impression of Myrtle is? Okay, then the second question, describe the relationship between the Wilsons. Use 2 pieces of text evidence to support your assertions. So make an inference about the Wilsons' relationship. How do they function as husband and wife? and then support your inference with textual evidence, 2 details from the text that allowed you to come to that conclusion. Okay, so this is an assignment that I want you to turn in. It's going to be posted on Google Classroom. I want you to turn in your answer, type your answers to a Google Doc and submit it via Google Classroom. Again, please don't share it with me. This will demonstrate that you have a strong grasp of the following skills that we have been focusing on this unit: analyzing diction, making inferences, using textual evidence to support assertions, and understanding tone. I also want you to type out this honor code at the top of your assignment. You don't have to sign your name, you can just type your name, but this is my gentle reminder to you not to cheat or share your work because I'm going to be looking for it. Okay, so please write out that honor code at the top of your paper in a Google Doc, and then type your answer to these 2 questions and submit it to Google Classroom, please. We're going to pick up with part 2 of chapter 2 with the next video. Thanks for watching.